A weak pawn structure is one of the worst liabilities in chess because it's so permanent. Weak pawns tend to last, well, pretty much all of the game and they're easy to target. But determining what is a weak pawn structure is not as easy as it may look at first sight. Sometimes just spotting weak pawns, isolated pawns, double pawns, and thinking that the pawn structure is actually weak is not good enough. And as we're going to see in this video, there are many cases in which weak pawns can actually be an asset. They give us some other advantages that may lie in the background if we're not aware of them. This happens because in chess, no single positional factor can be considered in isolation. We have to consider the position as a whole. So let's go to the examples and see how weak pawns can actually be good for us in some specific situations. In this position, black has a couple of isolated pawns on a6 and c5. We know that isolated pawns are those that don't have any other pawns, any other colleagues on adjacent files. There are no pawns on the b file, no pawns on the d file for black, and that means no one could ever defend the pawn on c5. No other pawns can support that pawn. If we had the pawn on b7, we'll still have the possibility of pushing b6 and keeping the pawn on c5 defended by another pawn. But as things are, c5 is never going to be defended by another pawn. So if we take a look at the position, at the pawn structure as a whole, we might notice that black has two such pawns. There's a pawn on a6 and a pawn on c5. And then he has one more block of pawns here that goes from h7 to e6. While white only has two such blocks of pawns, which we normally call pawn islands. There's one on a2 and b3, but these two pawns are not isolated. They are defending each other, they look really solid. And this is the other one, the pawns ranging from h2 to e5, and we don't consider e5 isolated, of course, because the f2 pawn can still advance and defend the pawn, even though that looks like it's gonna be tough at the moment. So if we look at it just like that, we might consider that black's pawn structure is actually worse, which might be the truth if we get rid of a lot of pieces. But as things stand, the problem for white is that black has a very clear plan. Black has the semi-open file to put pressure on b3, and he's going to play a5 and a4, attacking b3 and threatening to isolate it by taking on b3, and when white takes back, he will have a very weak pawn on b3 that will actually be quite easy for black to attack. He just puts the rooks on the b file, and b3 is definitely going to suffer. And there's one more factor in this position that makes it very strong for black to go this way, and that's the d5 bishop. This bishop is an absolute monster, and it will have a very important role in putting pressure on b3 and c4, which is supported by b3. White doesn't really have a clear answer to this plan. You might think, okay, white has the semi-open c file to put pressure on the isolated pawn on c5, so what about that? Well, the problem is that for weakness to actually be a weakness, it has to be possible to attack it. Here it's impossible to attack c5, it's so well defended, and if you put a rook on the c file, that's alright I guess, but the problem is that whenever you get the knight out of here, the bishop is already attacking b3, so black plays a5 right away, intending to go a4. And how are you going to pull this off if you put a rook on c1? a4 comes immediately, b3 is under a lot of stress. You can't really get the knight out of here without losing b3. So white is in real trouble. And it's very hard to play this with white, even though black seems to have the worst pawn structure. But the secret is that sometimes weak pawns leave open files. The more pawn islands you have, here we have 3 against white's 2, the more open files you will get. Here you have the b file. If the a5 pawn was on b6, the pawn structure would be better, sort of, but the position would be worse for black, at least compared to this excellent position we've got here, because here we get to weaken the b3 pawn, and if we had our pawns perfectly well placed pawns on b6, c5, well, we wouldn't get that chance to break on a4 and put pressure down the b file on that poor pawn on b3. So White is confronted with a very tough choice here, and he plays a4. And maybe he thought, well, I can put some pressure on this pawn too, and then later I would target c5 by putting the rooks on the c file. But b3 is a really weak pawn at this point, and it's very likely that it will suffer. But for the time being, we probably need some answer to queen e1 ideas. I don't know if it's possible right away, but a5 might suffer. And Black came up with a very nice concept. He just has to improve one more piece. This knight is not shining at all, and it would be much better placed on c6. From c6 it could jump into b4, into d4, while still putting pressure on e5, which is, by the way, a bit overextended, even though it's not strictly a weak pawn. It's far away from White's pieces, and it's hard to sustain, especially since White can't push f4. So Black goes knight b8, a very nice maneuver to relocate the knight to a better square, where it's actually going to be a great piece. Rook f d1 was played. White is just kind of going through the motions, trying to improve his pieces little by little, but Black is certainly getting the upper hand here. Nice c6, bishop to c3, rook a b8, and look at how much the position has changed. White has to start defending weak pawns himself. We call this a backward pawn. It's falling behind the pawn that's next to it, and it's almost impossible. Well, it's completely impossible for White to push at any point. So the pawn has fallen behind, we call it backward, and it's really easy to attack, and it's on the semi-open file. And yeah, we have two of those weaknesses, but who cares if White can attack them? Rook f d8, queen e1. So yeah, sorry, White got a lot of pressure here, but knight b4 solves it all. And now, well, White has to deal with bishop takes f3, absolutely destroying the pawns on the king side. And he went wrong. He played queen e3, which is understandable, but it's a tactical mistake. He should have gone knight f to d2, supporting c4, defending b3. And even though it's uncomfortable, well, White is still in the game. It's just that the bishop is making such a big difference that White has no hope of attacking our supposedly weak pawns. So after queen e3, well, Black found a very nice way to convert here. He took bishop takes c4, because a4 is going to be really easy to collect after White takes on c4. If rook takes d8 first, just to compare this to what happened in the game, Black has this very nice move. Maybe, just maybe, White completely missed this, which wouldn't be so strange. And after b takes c4, Black has to find a very beautiful tactic that works fantastically well. Knight d5. With the discovered attack on the rook, and the bishop on d8 is actually quite useful. If the bishop wasn't on the last rank, then rook takes b8 would be check. But now rook takes b8 is just answered with knight takes e3, because it's just not check. And we win the queen, and the rook is still left hanging. But instead, White can play something else. Queen e1, defending the bishop, but he's just dropping the bishop on c3 after rook takes b1, queen takes b1, knight takes c3. White can still get his piece back with queen c2, but at the very least, we're gonna have an extra pawn after knight c3, c takes d, we take the pawn back. We gave back the piece, but we won the c4 pawn in the end, and these pawns are definitely going to advance, so that's not a great result for White for sure. So after bishop takes c4, White had to accept just taking with the pawn. And now after rook takes d1 check, rook takes d1, queen c6, and there's absolutely nothing to do against queen takes a4. If rook a1, well, he's just falling for the fork with knight c2. And the rook on a1 is gone. So White played h4. Black even takes his time to play h6, well, vacating the last rank, so he has a flight square on h7, and at the same time stopping any knight jumps or any kind of counterplay. King h2, rook a8. Having this defended, the rook is going to be behind the passed pawn anyway. And after queen takes a4, then we're going to start advancing this pawn. Bishop takes b4, a takes b4, and a4 is falling anyway. Knight d2. Finally, queen takes a4. Black had all the time in the world, knight b3. But it's an easy technical win. Black has it under control. h5, rook a2, rook d2, rook takes d2. Knight takes d2, queen a4, and the queen is infiltrating. This pawn is going to be a headache. Knight b3, queen a2. There's queen c2 coming. That will just mean the end for the pawn c4. So queen d3, but then queen takes f2, and of course white resigns. He's down 2 pawns. All of these pawns are rather weak now, and they're all likely victims. So white gave up. And incredibly, it was white who had the inferior pawn structure, even though from a formal perspective, we could say, if you look at the position, yeah, he has more pawn islands. He has 3 of them, 2 isolated pawns on a6 and c5, and still, he had what he needed, a semi-open file with nice prospects of just breaking on a4 and attacking b3 very easily. So yeah, the pawn structure, at least the weak pawns in it, doesn't tell the whole story. And let's take a look at another example. We've seen that open files are instrumental as a way of attacking weak pawns. After a5, a4, it was easy to attack b3 after the exchange on b3. And it's one of the hidden advantages you get when you have isolated pawns. There are files that are open and you can take advantage of them. Let's see another example. This is a very famous game, Botvinnik-Panov, that was kind of a sensation at the time, and it's a very important instructional game. And the reason is Botvinnik comes up with an idea that might and you might think it's completely absurd. He played d takes e5 in this position, breaking up his pawn structure on purpose. I mean, this d4 pawn was part of a pawn mass here that contains a couple of double pawns, yeah, on c2 and c3, but it looks crazy to part with the d pawn and just leave 2 isolated and double pawns. Yeah, because these pawns are isolated and double. Isolated meaning that there are no pawns on the b or the d file that could defend any of these pawns. At the same time, they are double, one in front of each other. So the problem is for black that he can't easily attack the pawns. When the double and isolated pawns are on a semi-open file, it's very easy to attack them. But there is a pawn on c5 in this case, so at least white knows that the pawns will be safe for now. It still looks horrible, doesn't it? And I'm not claiming these pawns are any great, but they do have some hidden upside to them. And Botvinnik looks at this square and thinks, if I can get a knight there, that will be absolutely amazing. I can even support it even further by playing c4. And here comes the other hidden advantage of weak pawns, in this case isolated pawns. The c2 pawn can go to c3 and defend the d4 square. Black can't do that. d5 is definitely a hole in his position that he can't plug. And you see that the double pawns in this case give white some added extra central control. And that comes in handy a lot of times. Knight h4 was the move by Botvinnik. He certainly saw this idea beforehand. Knight f5 attacking the queen, and the knight could easily be transferred to e3 and d5. Black played g6, and he even goes knight g2. I know he's playing a lot of knight moves, but if we get a knight to d5, that would be fantastic, and black still has some pieces in the way. Well, knight g7. just getting knights out of the way so this bishop can develop somewhere probably, but it's still pretty slow, I would say. Knight 93, knight f6, bishop g2. Finally, that bishop gets to the fianchetto. Bishop e6, c4. And of course, we intend to go knight d5, and if black takes our knight, we can even make the pawns straight again. They're going to be undoubled, and we will have a passed unsupported pawn on d5. So rook a to d8, queen e2. He could have gone knight d5 probably, but he prefers to save it for later. Queen e2, knight to d7, and bishop b2. Again, we also have an extra semi-open file thanks to the double pawns, but here the most important thing is that black can't actually replicate our plan. We're definitely heading for knight d5 at some point, while even if black gets to maneuver his knight all the way to c6, we just play c3 and d4 is off limits. So bishop b2, and white also has the idea of breaking on f4 at some point, and bishop on b2 is going to be extremely strong. So well, he played f6 to have e5 defended, f4 anyway, rook d to e8, rook a to d1, black just plays b6 to consolidate his pawn structure a little bit more, and white starts doubling up. He's just going to double up here, and maybe even threaten some f5 because this bishop is instrumental to defending that knight. So e takes f4, g takes f4, and black is quite clever here, I would say. He plays g5, and the idea is to get the e5 square for his pieces. That's why he wants to divert this pawn from f4 to get e5 for the knight. Unfortunately for him, this bishop is quite strong, and it's quite unlikely that he will get full control of e5 at all. After f takes g, white plays e5 immediately. White plays e5, and there's no piece coming to e5, and knight d5 is certainly coming. Queen f7, anticipating knight d5 anyway, and the knight is a monster. The pawns didn't show their weakness at all. I mean, they were completely unreachable for black. And again, supporting the same thesis. If the weak pawns can't actually be attacked, it's hard to even call them weak at all. I know, if this was an endgame with only heavy pieces, well, the pawns would be terrible, of course. And in any endgames with less pieces, the double pawns, the isolated pawn h2 could become a problem, definitely. But we're a long way from getting there. Knight h5, rook f1, knight to f4, and white just centralized the queen with queen e4. And whenever black takes on d5, we rectify the pawns on d5 and e5 are absolutely amazing, very strong. And black definitely doesn't want that. So he tried to release the tension a little bit, playing queen f5, but ultimately he's dropping a pawn and freeing the action of these two bishops after, queen takes f5. Maybe, I don't know, maybe or maybe not this is the case, but if rook takes f5, maybe he missed knight c7 with a fork, rook to e7, knight takes e6, and he can't take back with the knight because the rook will be hung, it's pinned. While at the same time, rook takes e6 is met with bishop d5. Again, same problem, the pin, the rook is lost on e6, and if knight takes d5, then rook takes f5, and we win the exchange, and g5 is going to fall on the next move, and it's a complete disaster for black. So maybe he missed that he couldn't just take with the rook on f5, because after bishop takes f5, knight takes f4, g takes f4, bishop d5 check, this doesn't look promising at all. I guess Panov must have missed something like that here, because now if the king goes to g7 or h8, e6 is coming, and it's exactly what happened, because bishop e6 loses the knight on d7 after bishop takes e6, which remove removes the defender, and then we take on d7. Rook takes e6, rook takes d7 with an extra piece. So king g7 instead, e6 check, discover check, and the knight has to go to f6. Rook takes f4, and the pressure is just unbearable. f6 is going to collapse. King g6, rook g2 check, and black has to part with some material. Knight g4, rook g takes g4 check. The two bishops are, of course, way stronger than a single rook, and we have as just one more asset here, pawn on e6. It's a cherry on top. Rook g3, rook g8, bishop g7. Anything wins here, but white finds a nice way here with bishop f8. Just to end it with a little joke here. If rook takes f8, he plays the skewer, gets the rook back. He has an extra bishop for absolutely nothing. So here black just resigned. If rook takes g3, well, it's not going to take long. Rook e7, at the very least, we can make him sacrifice the rook for the pawn and the bishop, and we're going to keep this extra bishop. King f6, bishop c6, rook takes, bishop takes, king takes. We have a full extra bishop there, so it's definitely a win. So you see, there are two big reasons why weak pawns in general can be really strong. Sometimes we get open files, sometimes we get some added central control, which is very often the case with these double and isolated pawns. Just having this pawn on the back means that we can push it and get control of some crucial squares. Well, the opponent in this case couldn't say the same about d5. Just one more example about this same topic. This is a very famous game and very important theoretically. Sorry, I'll just not hide. Sorry, I will change the orientation. There it is. It's a game between Fischer and Botvinnik-Panov, a very strong grandmaster. This must be one of Kholmov's most important, more beautiful wins. And white has played the Rouser in the, it's a variation in the Ruy Lopez. Let me go back a little bit here. Where white takes on c5 to change this pawn structure in a way that he gets the d5 square for a knight. And he starts a maneuver with knight f1, with the idea of knight e3, and sending a knight eventually into d5. So after bishop e6, knight e3, the game went rook a d8, queen e2, c4, this is how we got there, and Fischer played knight g5, which is maybe not a mistake, but it's maybe a step in the wrong direction. And it seems like it's quite annoying to allow white to take on e6. But if we pull the bishop back, then white gets some added control of the d5 square, and he might have some annoying quick knight d5 here. So what to do? Well, Kholmov just goes h6. He doesn't really care about white taking on e6, and Fischer did. But the thing is, this double and isolated pawn can be really weak if we look at them in isolation, but black is getting a lot in return. For one thing, d5 is not a thing anymore. We don't have a problem with that weak square, and the same can be said about f5. At the same time, we have the bishop coming to c5, and now we got the open f-file, so the bishop and the rook would interact very well, aiming at the f2 pawn. It's not that these pawns are always strong, but there are going to be cases in which they are, in which they can be a real asset. Here black is getting a lot in return for this permanent weakness. Sometimes, of course, they're just going to be weak. They're going to be easy to put pressure on. It doesn't seem to be the case here, though. Well, Fischer, probably shocked by the novelty, made a mistake. He played b4 here. A move like b3 could also be very instructive. He's trying to free the bishops a little bit, maybe get the bishop into b3, attacking the pawn on e6. But there's a really nice idea here. After bishop c5, just a normal move, but what if b takes c? It's worth thinking about it. If you have some time to think about this, just try to find black's idea. It's very instructive. I'm going to show it right now. Black plays b4. Again, eliminating this very important pawn. And it's funny because here for a second, white also has this double isolated pawn, but the pawn on c3 is essential. It's essential to keep d4 guarded. And after c takes b, bishop takes b4, attacking the rook, let's say rook b1, we get d4 for the knight, and we see a very similar situation to that of the Botvinnik game. In that the double and isolated pawns give you some added central control. So we don't have a problem with knight d5, but we have knight d4 coming, and white would really wish he had a double pawn on c3 guarding d4. He doesn't, and we can play knight d4 with a very clear advantage. Well, that was definitely an alternative, but Fischer played b4, and Kholmov plays this game spectacularly. He sacrifices the knight, but he's going to get a huge pawn phalanx, a huge pawn mass that's just going to advance. After c takes, e takes, it's not a 100% real sacrifice. We're going to play d3 on the next move with a fork against the bishop and the queen and get our piece back. So it's not a completely real sacrifice, but we're going to get, after the smoke has cleared, a very powerful passed pawn on c4. After a3, we prefer to get the bishop here, of course. The knight is actually quite well restricted by, again, our pawn e6. Bishop takes d3, rook takes d3, and we have a fantastic rook on the third, supported by a passed and protected pawn on c4. e4 is kind of hard to defend, so he goes knight g4. Well, king h7, I don't know how necessary it was, but still valid. e5, knight takes g4. Queen e4 check, g6. But we still got the open files. We have the main open file, a semi-open file. After queen takes g4, well, the smoke has cleared a little bit, and we get an excellent square on f5 where we can put pressure on the far advanced e5 pawn. We have full control of the light squares, better pawns, an amazing pawn on c4. Well, it was just a matter of technique for Kholmov, who didn't do it perfectly, but in the end he prevailed. Let's quickly go through it. Bishop e3, queen d5, queen takes, rook takes, f4. This is a beautiful endgame for black because, well, he has full control of the light squares. g5 undermines the pawn. On e5, actually, we're trying to make him exchange, so then this pawn will be impossible to defend. g3, g takes, now a weak pawn f4 emerges, rook f8, king to g2, king g6, rook g1, rook d3, king f3 check, king f5, rook g7. Maybe Kholmov allowed a little bit more counterplay than it was necessary. Around here, the rook g8. He's still, I mean, Fischer is still in trouble, no question. But the problem is here, white makes a huge mistake with rook b8. Thinking, well, I'm pinning this, so bishop h4 isn't coming. He was trying to defend against bishop h4 and rook g3, most likely. But he could have just played rook f7 check, king g6, and repeat moves. And see how black keeps trying. Maybe black can still go king h5. He still has the upper hand. His rooks are better. White has only one active rook to try to create trouble, and definitely white is still struggling here, but at least he's alive. After rook b8 though, rook g7 just stepping out of the pin, d8 is defended by the rook on d3, so bishop h4 is coming soon enough, or h4, not bishop h4 because there's still this annoying check, so h5, threatening h4, rook g3, and that'll probably be it. But after a takes, white took the pawn, but now bishop h4 is even stronger. There's no way to stop rook g3, and now white doesn't have the resource of checking. And after king e2, well, finally rook g2 check, king f1, rook to h2, and something's gotta give. I mean, it's all of these pieces surrounding the king. So king g1 attacking the rook on h2, so we don't have time to capture the bishop, but rook e2, bishop b6, c3, he doesn't even stop to take pawns, no way, we're just making a queen here. King f1, rook h2 again, and finally Fischer gives up. If king to g1 again, this time rook d takes h3, we're threatening rook h1 check with a skewer capturing the rook. We're also threatening c2, so it's a complete disaster for white and time to resign. So as we saw, double pawns, isolated pawns sometimes have some upside. If we consider the position as a whole, we're going to see that in some cases we're going to get some advantages due to having those weak pawns. It's very typical of these pawns that Kholmov got in this position, that these double isolated pawns have that advantage that give us some important control of very key squares in the center. Of course, we get this into an endgame with less pieces over the board and with some access of white's pieces to these pawns, and we might collapse. But it wasn't the case here, and in many middle games this does happen. So it's very important to take it into account. So thanks for watching. If you like the content, please leave a like and subscribe. I'm going to see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Stay tuned. Bye bye.